I'm Dominic Claxton, a senior baseball student athlete and English pre-med major here at Old Dominion University. And I welcome all of those in attendance this evening to the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force and SAAC lecture series titled State and Local Government, Why We Should Vote. Our two prestigious panelists this evening will be Councilman Aaron Rouse and Dr. Benjamin Molesky. Councilman Rouse was born in Norfolk, Virginia and raised in Virginia Beach, Virginia. An All-American football player at First Colonial High School, Rouse graduated with a bachelor's degree in sociology from Virginia Polytechnical Institute and State University, also referred to as Virginia Tech, while lettering 4 years for the Hokies on the football field, where he was named a freshman All-American and made first-team All-ACC. Following his senior year, Rouse was drafted by the Green Bay Packers in the 2007 NFL Draft. He would also go on to play for the New York Giants and Arizona Cardinals before retiring from the NFL and returning home to Virginia Beach to begin his career in public service. He served as a coach and mentor before founding Rouse's House, a nonprofit organization whose mission and goal is to establish education as the foundation to success by exposing youth and families in the community to a broader world of learning. On November 6, 2018, Rouse made history when he became the youngest African American to be elected to the Virginia Beach City Council, which represents the largest populated city in the state of Virginia. In 2019, Rouse was named the only city liaison for the Something in the Water Music Festival created by Pharrell Williams. And in 2020, thanks to his hard work and dedication to the city of Virginia Beach, Rouse was named to the esteemed Civic Leadership Institute class of 2021. Rouse is a strong advocate for the support of first responders and military along with their families. He is passionate about the potential growth of Virginia Beach into a strong economic travel and entertainment destination with support from its residents along with tourists. His mission is to provide, protect, and produce greatness for the city of Virginia Beach. Dr. Benjamin Molesky is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Geography at Old Dominion University. After receiving his master's and doctorate degrees from the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Molesky joined ODU in 2016 and teaches classes on state and local government, public policy, and morality politics. His research focuses on governors and state legislatures, the role of women in politics, and the impact of political institutions on governmental and electoral outcomes, which has been published in academic journals such as the Journal of Politics, PS, Political Science and Politics, and the Journal of Women, Politics, and Policy. He's a frequent contributor to local and regional news coverage that regard issues affecting Hampton Roads, the Commonwealth, and the nation more generally. We would also like to thank Dr. Molesky's state and local government class for being in attendance this evening. And so with that, if you're ready, let's start and begin with the first question. This question is for both panelists, and Councilman Rouse, if you would like to go first. What made you start a career in your current field?
Thank you for that great introduction. I'm kind of glad we got to do it twice. I really appreciate that. First, I thank ODU for having me here tonight to answer your questions, and hopefully I can bring more insight to local government. For me, I envision myself playing 10 plus years in the National Football League. It's something that I anticipated since I was 8 years old, growing up in Youngs Park in the St. Paul's Quadrant, not far from ODU. And so when life, throws you a curveball, baseball player Lynch, that one's for you. You want to knock it out the park. And so I got into a bad car accident when I was playing with the Arizona Cardinals. And so I had an opportunity. I had to retire from the National Football League after that. And then I had an opportunity to really learn from members of our state government in the General Assembly. And so I learned a lot on both sides of the aisle for Democrats and Republicans. And so after 3.5 years of learning, I thought it was great that I come home and really bring my talents to Virginia Beach and find a more of a way to give back to my community, have more of an impact. And so how I got to this point, it wasn't by design, but it was keeping an open mind. and it was being open to try new things. And so also I'll say networking is another way how I got into this lane.
Well, thank you for having me as well. It's quite an esteemed honor to be on the same panel with Councilman Rouse as well. I got into teaching and politics roughly at the same time you all are at right now. I was interning for a congressperson when I was an undergraduate, and I had taken a job in my home state of Pennsylvania working in Harrisburg. I was working with the Secretary of State, their voting division, implementing the Help America Vote Act, basically taking federal dollars and working on making polling places more accessible, working on getting people out to vote, working on making just voting more accessible to populations, and got to see that state and government was really vastly important and was doing things that actually impacted people's lives much more than when I was working on the Hill and thinking that Washington, D.C. was everything that it really should be. But the reality was state government and then working with all the local governments, that's where all the action was at. And that's where I actually felt like I was making a difference. So got me into that. And then ultimately the interest kind of bloomed and I went to graduate school and got a degree. And now I'm at ODU teaching with y'all.
Alrighty, this next question is also for both of you. Dr. Molesky, if you'd like to go first. What function does your role play in local politics, and what are your general responsibilities?
For the most part, I'm actively involved in just teaching young people, trying to get you excited and passionate about the role of state and local government, trying to make you better democratic citizens, trying to help you to understand that if you really think about making a difference, it's not what happens in DC, right? If you really want to see something done, it's at the local level. So I do a lot, obviously, at ODU, working with various organizations on campus, and you probably see me all the time on the local news, especially on election night, talking about election results and giving some analysis on there. Beyond that, working to get people signed up to vote and working at the polling places as well on election day. So a lot of little things here and there.
Yeah, I think here locally, I think there's three main distinctions I want you all to understand and to learn tonight. So Virginia Beach is unlike any other locality here in the region. We have a hybrid system by way how we elect our city officials. And so we have a at-large district type of system where everybody in the city votes for everybody, but the members who are living in the Pacific District can only represent, well, they represent the entire city, but they represent their district. It's weird. Unlike Norfolk has district or ward systems where only people in that ward system can vote for their district representative. Another interesting fact about Virginia Beach is that we have a city council, city manager form of government. So, which means that our mayor does not have more authority than no other council member on city council. So we have a council city manager form of government. The other third interesting fact is that we are a Dillon rule state, which means that all of our authority comes from the General Assembly at the state. And so locally here, while we can issue local taxes, mills tax, admissions tax, advertising tax, things like that, we cannot issue state taxes unless it's approved we get our authority from the state. And so why that matters, because we essentially touch your lives, by way of business permits, your water, what do you pay for water, rent. We try to make sure by ways of rent, meaning permits and affordable housing, things of that nature. Also, if you have a dispute, maybe, your neighbor, is too loud or has a conditional use permit, CUP, we negotiate those things or whether or not to sanction or take those away, whether or not to provide or even put on something such great as something in the water. So local politics affects your everyday life. You see it every single day. And that's just why it's so important, as Dr. Molesky said.
All right, Councilman, this question is for you. Is a person elected to your role, or are you appointed by someone?
Right. So I'm elected, and the difference is again, Virginia Beach is weird. So understand me. I'm an at-large member, which means I don't have a specific district I represent. I represent the entire city, and so I have to represent all 455 plus thousand people within the city. And so I have a 4-term limit. So my seat is up every 4 years, which I have to run for. Every council member seat is up every 4 years, by the way. And so I serve in an elected capacity.
This next question is also for you. How does your role interact with the mayor, and how does it interact with the governor?
Well, again, we are your mouthpiece to state legislation, state legislators. Again, our mayor here doesn't have more authority than any other council member, but yet he is recognized as the mouthpiece for council. So it's essentially he can speak on our behalf whenever we come up as a collective body to give him points to speak on our behalf about. It matters when we deal with the governor, for instance. We're trying to find ways to make sure our public is vaccinated. We're trying to find ways that every community has an opportunity to be vaccinated. And so while there's times where the mayor may specifically speak on behalf of the city in much broader terms, each council members kind of go on and help in that way of speaking directly to the governor or other state officials as well, such as your delegates or state senators. And it all matters what type of relationship you have, because again, we're a Dillon Rule state, and so the entire state is asking for resources from our state legislators. And so it matters whether or not you can essentially lobby on your behalf of your city to get the resources you need to provide for our citizens. And I'm sure Dr. Molesky can make sure I hit that on the head.
Nope, exactly right.
Councilman, this question is also for you, and I know you touched on it a second ago, but are there term limits to your particular role? And if so, what are they?
There are term limits, here, and this is why you all are so important. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity to speak with you all, because you bring in a completely different set of issues, of ideas, of resources, of perspectives. And it matters that we have this turnover, not just locally, but also at the state and federal level, because you can answer directly to the issues and problems your generation is specifically facing, right? And you can handle hopefully handle those situations a lot better. So while there are council members I serve with now who've been on council since before I was born, and they have a lot of knowledge and they have a lot of knowledge we can tap into. But again, when you've heard all your life, you are the future, well, it's up to you all to step up and get involved, here and organize yourselves. I think you all have a great tool at your disposal of using social media. I know a lot of times, we get on there and we do our little likes, but it's really a great tool for you all to build collaborations and consensus around issues that specifically affect you all. And so, again, my term is only 4 years, but unless you all step up, I can serve continuously until you all decide, hey, we need a voice. You are not providing, the necessary focus or attention that we need to deal with our issues. And so this is why it's so important for you all to get involved.
Dr. Molesky, this question is for you. Why do some elected positions have term limits and others do not?
Well, as the councilman gave us, really the answer is it rests with y'all. Is that we hear a lot today about the need for term limits, right? As the councilman said, it helps to bring kind of new blood into positions, right? It gives there was a lot of talk of if we institute term limits, it kind of kicks out the old boys club and allows women, minorities, a chance to run in open seat elections as opposed to running up against an incumbent juggernaut, right? If you kind of look at it over time, right, if we go back to the founding of the country, the Articles the Articles of Confederation actually had term limits in place. But when we went and put in place the Constitution, the drafters actually saw this very short document is if we added term limits it entered too much detail into a short document, right? So for basically a long period of time, we didn't really operate with term limits. And it really wasn't until like 1990 with Oklahoma, of all places, started with direct democracy. They basically put in place term limits for their state legislators. And it kind of opened the floodgates for Colorado. They put term limits on Congress. And then California did it. And then really over the next year, about 14 other states started using direct democracy to institute term limits. Ultimately, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, well, you really can't limit the members of Congress because the Constitution doesn't say anything about that. So that got struck down. But individual states were allowed to do it. And hundreds of cities and counties across the country really opened the floodgates there, saw the appeal of it. The efficacy of term limits, that's a whole nother discussion into itself. We thought it would kind of bring this influx of women and minorities into office in a lot of these states that put it in place. But as the councilman said, we tend to still reelect the same people over and over, even if you have term limits in place in some. We saw a bunch of states ultimately actually repeal their term limits in the interim. So there is an important role for term limits, right? But it comes with some pros and cons with it as well, too.
Can I just, and Dr. Molesky said it perfectly, it comes with its pros and cons. I tend to think one of the cons would be some members who are serving, 40 or 50, 60 years is that minorities a lot of times don't get the say so or just or voice that they need at a particular level of government. Also, you can become entrenched in a seat for so long that the main lobbyists, people who are paid to advocate on behalf of companies or the like, then when you become entrenched for so long that you forget that isn't the people's seat, it's your seat. You tend to think it's your seat. And we all know we live in a representative democracy here, representative government. The seats that elected officials hold always and will always belong to the people. So it's important for you all to step up and to get involved.
And the reality is, even with term limits in place, right, it doesn't solve structural factors, right? So if you've had a person who's been in the seat the entire term, an old white man, let's just say, the system says that, all right, once he's done, who's the next person up? Right? Many of the special interests, many of the people that naturally get tapped to then run for that position look exactly like the same person who was just there, right? So there's structural factors in play of getting women, getting minorities into good positions of support and logistics to put them up as good, strong, supported candidates. And it's not just the quintessential old white male.
This next question is for both of you. Dr. Molesky, if you want to go first. What do you feel is the role of local, city, and state politics?
As the councilman said, I mean, it touches every aspect of your life. I always say this in my, kind of the first week of my state politics class, which is from the time you wake up, literally the time, right? I mean, states deciding daylight savings and things like that, right? So the time you go to bed, all the things you do in the morning, if you're getting caught behind a garbage truck or a school bus, right? From the things you do in your life, right? To the, the licensing of, if you're a beautician, literally from your birth, to your death, all those things are regulated. Literally, your birth is regulated to your death, morticians being regulated by the states and localities, right? Every aspect is touched by state and really local and city government, right? There's an old quote, and the person we probably attach it to is not long gone, but long lost forgot of Speaker Tip O'Neill from Massachusetts, or Congressperson from Massachusetts. He used to say, "All politics is local." That was the title of his memoir after the fact. But the reality is, all politics is local, right? It's the local government is the closest to the people, the services you get. I mean, local government is the prime deliverer of all the services and utilities and things we rely upon. And for y'all, I mean, this is kind of the focus of tonight's conversation is our city government, local government is the groomer for civic activism and political candidacy, right? Most people will get their start in politics at the local or city level before they make that plunge into the state level or even the federal level, right? We in our heads are like, everybody wants to run to become president, right? But you don't just instantly run to become president unless you have a significant amount of wealth or something to that effect, right? So you get your start at the lowest levels.
I would just add to that point, the great points that Dr. Molesky has made, is that, you know, we're a nation of laws. I mean, we are a nation of laws. There's nothing in this nation that's not governed, you know? And so it's so important that you all, you know, have a say-so in there. I know particularly for me, you know, I grew up in a single parent household and, you know, my father's incarcerated. And so we didn't have all the resources we needed growing up in Virginia Beach. And Virginia Beach is just a great city. There's still pockets of communities who don't have a say, right? Or don't necessarily have that voice. And so I never understood why, you know, my community garbage was the last to get picked up, or we didn't have the street lights, or not the paved sidewalks, right? Or the nice streets, right? And so you look at that issue, you look at criminal justice reform, you look at student loans issue, right? Colleges, right? By way of if the state providing type of resources for colleges to offer a lot of resources that you all will need. You look at the business community, you know, strategic growth areas, and talk about gentrification of communities and such and the likes. Those all are governed from the federal, state, and local level, because the local level is going to set the zoning laws or zoning capacity issue. The state is going to provide, you know, type of resources that's going to entice developers to come in and put in a type of affordable housing, but that they're not going to do anything unless they're going to have basically some type of incentive from the federal government. And so all of these things play a major factor in your life, whether you're driving down the highway from the day you're born, what elementary school you go to, what resources you have. State, local, and federal government plays a major factor into everything. I mean, just look at now all the restrictions that are in place to make sure that we can come out of this pandemic in a safe way. But there's local restrictions, there's state restrictions, and there's federal guidelines, all determining how you move about in your everyday life.
Dr. Molesky, this question is for you. How do we hold our local officials accountable to the campaign platform?
Well, the sad reality is it's really, really hard, because local campaigns, local elections really don't get the coverage that other campaigns do, right? I mean, the vast majority of y'all, I mean, if we did a poll right now, you know, of the 170 odd of you on here, right, maybe 20% of y'all paid attention and voted in a municipal election at some point in your lives, right? That's like 1 in 5 people has actually focused on the local level, right? When you think about the amount of money that's spent, so we're not talking in sheer magnitude of dollars, but if like you made it kind of comparative between levels, the singular dollar that is spent on a presidential campaign, you're getting about maybe 15 cents to the dollar at a local campaign being spent, right? That's generous, 15 cents to the dollar what's being spent on a presidential election, right? Half the time, most people don't even know elections are going on. A lot of states hold most of their municipal elections in the springtime, right? You're all thinking, okay, elections are like November, right? No, most municipal elections are held in the spring when most people are off doing other things. It's nice outside, they're not caring, right? So this is the hard part, is when we don't have a lot of information, we call these low information or low saliency campaigns. Most people don't pay attention, so therefore you don't know what the campaign promises of our local elected officials are. So the only way to really hold them accountable is to start paying attention, start using the resources that are at your disposal to be educated on the candidates, their campaign promises, and then also starting to get active at the local level, going to town hall meetings, right? I mean, you know, the vast majority of y'all probably, if I, you know, the 170 odd here, I said, how many of you have ever been to a town hall meeting? I would get probably about 6, right? You know, and if you want to talk about the, you know, the direct line to your politicians, that is the closest you will get to a politician, is going to a town hall meeting, and that is the closest you will get to hearing your voice actually be heard. But we're too busy. They're not exactly the most sexy things to go to, talking about budget issues and bond issues and things like that.
All right. I would say to hold people, the elected officials accountable, you have to vote and you have to show up. Listen, like if you all don't take away anything else myself or Dr. Molesky says tonight, understand this. There are people out there who are counting on you continuously being absent from the ballot. Your generation right now and the millennial young generation make up the largest populated segment of our society today. But yet only a small percentage of you vote. You're 18 years old now. You are eligible to vote. You have a civic responsibility to vote and to make sure that the changes that you all may speak about within your little groups, your peer groups, the change that you are seeking, well, those changes are fought for and hard fought for at the ballot box, right? And earlier I talked about using social media to build a consensus of like-mindedness around issues that you all share. That is a great tool for you to use. But again, time and time again, as I've seen it, there are members who are counting on you not showing up to the ballot. So they continuously keep the status quo going. Let me just toss this number out there as well. President Biden became the first elected official, elected president to raise $1 billion to win office in the United States. Now, I think there's too much money in politics, but I understand why it takes $1 billion. And that money essentially goes to media. It goes to buying media ads to continuously steer you all in the right way, right? To steer you all towards a specific candidate. That's why it's important for you all to do your homework. It's not enough for myself or Dr. Molesky to come here and say, this is who you should vote for. No, you should know who you're voting for by way of doing your own research, by way of the interest that you find this candidate speaks to. But again, that responsibility comes back to you. It comes back to you and how much of a focus and attention you pay to candidates at the ballot box. And again, start locally. It can be overwhelming your first time voting, or even looking at all the candidates, on the help me out here on the list, on the ballot. On the ballot. And so it's important for you, if you can't get to all the candidates, listen, go through and build your groups up, and then spread around the different, give everybody a different assignment, a different candidate, and then come back and collaborate on what did you learn about this candidate, and vote that way. But vote responsibly, and don't just take TV ads or medias or buys to say that you're informed.
I mean, the reality is youth voting has gone up, right? If you go back to 2016, about 48% of youth voters turned out and voted. Mm-hmm. And then in 2020, that number rose again, right? So it's about 52 to 55%, right? Mm-hmm. But that number is going to drop off drastically come the next local election, right?
Elections, right?
Yeah, the off-year elections, y'all are like, all right, president matters, right? Just think about this, right? Only about 30% of the public comes out and votes in municipal elections. Mm-hmm. If you could take that energy of the youth vote, right, and get more youth out, you all can take over the ballot box. I mean, that's the reality is if you can be organized, you can use social media, right? I mean, if there is a candidate or a policy position that you want in effect, I mean, if you all turned out in numbers, you would overwhelm all of the other, generations of people who come out and vote in municipal elections, and you can enact real change. Mm-hmm. It's just getting yourself mobilized.
Yeah. And in Virginia, there's an election every year, so you don't have an excuse not to vote.
This question is for the both of you. Councilman, if you want to go first, what do you love about being in your role, and what makes it difficult?
I love being in this position because, especially coming from an athletic perspective, it allows for us athletes not to be pigeonholed to say, well, you're only a football player, or you're only a baseball player, or a soccer player, or whatever your respective sport is. It's like, no, you're much more than that. And so there's a reason why in college you are studying within your specific fields, to learn to say, hey, sports is only going to be a small part of my life, but the things I learned from sport, the discipline, the communication, the teamwork, the collaboration, the patience, right, for differences, and and kind of having those differences. And it's a lot like politics, because there are members who I don't, like I don't share their political perspective, but once again, we understand we're on the same team, right? And that's a team to make sure we can move the city and the people forward. One of the things that's really hard is not being able to please everybody. When you govern from this position of at large, and you represent the entire community, you have to do what's best for the entire community, not just best for one segment of your community. And that's really hard. And so, but like sports, like you all know, we had to have that thick skin, because we know we mess up on a play, or we in a hostile environment, the people gonna let us know about it, right? Ain't no escaping it, and coach is gonna let us know about it. So it's having that thick skin, and the people, trust me, the people will definitely let you know about it. And they're not nice. Just compared to the sports world, those people are nice, but compared to here in politics, it could get pretty nasty, right? But again, it's for me, it's the fact that knowing that you have to make those tough decisions, but every decision you do so knowing that you judge everything on the merits, and you're trying to make sure you move your city ahead, and not just one segment of the population.
I love seeing students come into the classroom, and often they have little or no interest in politics, or especially state and local politics. And I always ask them, the first day of class, like, why are you taking my class? And the amount of students that just say, oh, it's for my major, for my minor, whatnot. I always call it mandatory fun. Like, you're coming because you have to, right? But by the end of the term, right, I seeing students, come back and talk to me about it and say, like, I never thought I was going to like this, or I never, knew this about X, Y, and Z. And, seeing the change that occurs in just a span of 15 weeks, right? I mean, if you figure if you can do that in 15 weeks, right? If we could somehow export enthusiasm and interest in kind of the lower levels of government, I honestly think would be a much better place. And literally, it takes 15 weeks to do that. I mean, so that thing that for me, that's the most exciting part, is to see that transformation in students.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, where I come from, man, I have friends right now who are, some aren't with us, some have been incarcerated. The fact that a whole community who people who look like me never had a voice necessarily on our city council. So to be able to come back to my community, to even go throughout the city and to spread inspiration, even throughout our region, to say you all are more than just athletes. You are more than just what society deems you to be, that you can be an upstanding member of your community. You can be an elected official. I mean, I love that, not for what it means for me, but what it means for our community as a whole. And so, again, I love being in this position to let, to be that guiding light, so to speak, for young men and women to follow and say, I don't have to be, an entertainer to be successful. I can be a businessman or a teacher, a professor, lawyer, doctor, councilman. I can do those things. And so that's one of the things I love about being in this position is it shows the versatility of athletes.
This next question is for both of you as well. Councilman, if you want to go first, what are your takeaways from the most recent racial reckoning and social unrest? And what role do you believe you play in the reconciliation?
Wow, that's a great question. Takeaway, I think, this is why I think more athletes could be in politics, because if you make a mistake, if you don't do something quite right on the field, you are held accountable. You cannot just ignore it. You can't say, well, it'll fix itself. And so for a long time for our country, I think the injustices that African Americans and minority has faced, there's been some type of thinking that somehow it'll fix itself, that it'll work itself out over time. And then until we confront the issues that continuously plague our society today, they will never be solved. And so my takeaway is understanding that everybody must get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? we have to have those tough conversations. We have to look our issues and problems squarely in the eye and say, how do we solve it? But we must come to the table with an open mind and with open ears, because if everybody's talking, it means nobody's listening, right? And I think here's my religion coming into play. We have to be slow to offense, because if you don't know, you don't know, right? And for a lot of times we like to tell people, well, you should have known better. Well, if you don't know, you don't know. And the other thing is, again, before I get upset, I want to make sure you hear me, you understand where I'm coming from, right? And so being in this position, being the youngest member, African-American member elected to city council, I bring a different perspective to council. And sometimes that's not always welcome, but it's needed to be heard, right? I need to hear it, because this is only going to help our society be stronger, help our community be stronger, by having those diverse ideas and those diverse perspectives. And it's hard, it's hard. But again, in order for us to get to those ideals that our country stands for, we have to go through this process, and it's something we have to confront. And so that's my main takeaway is to continuously be that outspoken person, but not in a way. It's all about approach. It's not about tearing people down. It's not about pointing out mistakes. It's about accountability, responsibility, and how do we build bridges going forward.
I think I've got kind of two big takeaways, just kind of observing what happened, right? And the first is very much it's about political engagement, right? It's that assembly remains a very potent tool for policy change, right? When you look at several surveys that have been out, and it's 1 in 10, 2 in 10 people actually know that freedom of assembly is one of our First Amendment freedoms. Like 1 in 10 people realize that, right? However, but the public certainly knows that they can exercise this right? We saw BLM marches in all 50 states, right? And the protesters largely reframed the conversation about racial justice. And over the last several months, public opinion has radically shifted in just a matter of weeks and months, right? So it was a very potent tool, something that we all have at our disposal. So it's how do we go about doing it, right? And at the same time, right, kind of the second takeaway is that we saw our local governments showing deference to these movements, right? It may not look like it, right? When you see kind of the pictures of the protesters face to face with heavily armed police officers. But the reality is that the cities have done little to prevent the marches, right? Cities have a great latitude under their control to determine the time, the place, the logistics of protests in general. But they largely haven't exercised that authority. So, I mean, as the councilman talked about, I mean, cities can require demonstration permits, they can bar protests from blocking traffic. But for the most part, they've recognized that aggressive regulation only exacerbates tensions, right? So the role of government, the role of myself as a professor is to facilitate conversations, to facilitate hard conversations, right? Uncomfortable conversations where we have to think through the tensions that have occurred, why those tensions have occurred, and really get to the heart of the matter here and actually try to empower young people, try to empower people of all different walks of life to get engaged in this process. It can't just be the people on the streets, right? It can't just be the people that get in front of a camera. I mean, literally everyone has to be uncomfortable for real change to occur, because the roots of this problem are not, they're deep. I mean, we're talking institutional, systematic problems with society that aren't going to be changed overnight. But the only way to get there is to have these hard conversations.
And I just want to also add the fact that this is how you begin to hold your elected officials accountable, right? Because what comes after the marching and the protesting, right? You have to be organized and start saying, you know what, if you don't put our interests first, then we're going to vote or elect or put someone in that seat who will put our interests first. And so it's enough to understand, how to utilize your political system to really get the things that you're seeking. And so I would say the marching and protesting, that's a great start. all right, what's next? What comes after that, right? And it starts with organizing to hold your elected officials accountable.
This next question is for both of you. Dr. Molesky, if you'd like to go first, what is your interpretation of the defund the police rhetoric, and do you believe in community policing?
That's a tricky question. I think it's the rhetoric surrounding defund the police was problematic, right? It was problematic because the narrative got taken away, right? For the most of us, we understand what defund the police means once you dig past the surface level, right? It means about taking money and putting it into social services and mental health, domestic violence, homelessness, funding schools, things like that. It means changing police departments, training. It means about how officers respond and how maybe not just officers responding, right? How we respond differently, right? It is so much more than the surface level. And I think this is where you have to move beyond the protests and the march, right? Because the protests and the march were very much galvanized around Black Lives Matter, right? I mean, even something like Black Lives Matter, you have to dig below the surface, right, to really talk about what it means. And if you don't, right, you get stuck on these surface level, Black Lives Matter, defund the police. And the narrative doesn't educate, it doesn't move the conversation forward, it doesn't change policy. And I think that's where, like I said, it's a tricky question. But in terms of, what it actually means, right, of doing this, right, this is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, we saw after the fact, right, this defund the police. New York, they slashed $1 billion from their budget, right, and they put, depending on the reallocations, like 350 million of it to things like mental health, homelessness, education services. We saw Los Angeles cut $150 million from their $1.86 billion police budget and reallocate it. We saw San Francisco cut $120 million, right? Baltimore cut $22 million, right? So lots and lots of kind of change occurred after the fact, right? And that's where it has to go, right? You can't just stop there, right? We have to have more conversations. You have to hold your elected officials accountable. Minneapolis, in the wake of George Floyd's death, right? They talked about changing their police department, right? And replacing the current system with one more focused on public health and safety. But ultimately that got delayed because of the Minneapolis Charter Commission, right? And so the conversation has effectively stopped, right? And this is where things like community policing, right? Things like the defund the police movement have to progress farther than just the protests and those conversations. They actually have to translate into policy change. And the way that actually happens is if people stay engaged, continue to hold their politicians, elected officials, feet to the fire. And, if change isn't occurring, right, that's when you go to the ballot box and you throw out the people that are being intransigent and not moving, and you put new people in that will actually bring about change.
That's great. Wow, that was a great answer, Dr. Miller. that was a great answer to a very, very tough question. I think, again, the interpretations of what defund the police, I think it varies around the country. But I think what it all have in common is the fact that it's so easily to hijack that phrase, defund the police. And I think that if you understand the history of the way certain political factions have, and even the government have hijacked movements. You can take a look at the Black Panthers, for example, how their whole Black Panthers, what they stood for, was hijacked and demonized, so to speak. You could take a look at what Malcolm X, essentially who Malcolm X was, and how that was hijacked and what he really stood for after his venture to Mecca. And so, again, I tend to look at it from a social scientist perspective. For me, that's my degree is in sociology, and I want to understand it more. So yes, do I believe in community policing? Absolutely. I think it's essential to our society. But I also understand that you have to hold people accountable. I understand that just like the police, just like elected officials, just like mayors and corporate people sit on boards, these are all social constructs. These are all social things that we develop as humans to develop our society. I understand there are good and bad people in every segment, every walk of life, everywhere. And so I'm into holding people accountable and not using institutions to hide behind. With that being said, here in the city of Virginia Beach, our police department has run approximately 60 to 80 officers short for quite some time. So we've actually been understaffed. Another factor to look at from a social perspective is that we talk about community policing. One of the benefits of community policing is for an officer to live in the community in which they police. But that's kind of hard to do in a city like ours because it's very expensive to live here. And so if you don't have the wage or the salaries enough to keep officers and their first responders in communities in which they serve, then it makes community policing a lot harder. All right. And so you got to look at it, for me, I look at it from a social construct issue. Also, what are you doing with the resources available that you have? Are you spending more resources in reactive things, or are you being more proactive? Are you providing jobs? Are you providing higher levels of educational resources, not just for the students, but also for the teachers as well? Do you have a community you can put back to work? And so these are all issues that play a factor in interaction between policing and communities. I think it goes without saying that African Americans and police have a long history of divide, right? That dates all the way back to slavery. And so once you start understanding the history of policing in America, it helps you kind of build that bridge. Okay, where can we politically and systemically make these changes at, right? Virginia is a huge state for old slave laws, fugitive slave laws. And so a lot of those laws we've gotten off the books, but when you talk about reform in the aspect of, you don't just give it a new name and keep the same system intact. You really have to, like Dr. Molesky said, they are so deeply rooted within our society. You have to go in and really get hands-on and change them so that you can see the changes that you need. But it only works if entire segment has a voice, if the young people have a voice, if minorities have a voice, if LGBTQ plus communities have a voice, if every segment of your population has a voice, then you can start to build that society in which you all feel like you have a vested interest in, and that no one is being suppressed by it. And so it's a work. It's not just an effort on behalf of elected officials or our police department. It's on every single last one of us. And I think we all have to do our part in order to really build a community that we want.
Councilman Rouse, this question is for you. What is your stance on protests, and how do you keep them from becoming destructive?
I think protesting is a part of your First Amendment right, if I'm not mistaken. You have the right to assembly, I think, but you lose your message once you start getting violent or being destructive. And that's where, I think when emotions get so high and people become so passionate, well, they just, they never take that step forward. They done took 3 or 4 steps backwards because you lose the focus on what you're protesting for. And so for me, I applaud anybody who wants to protest and bring more awareness to the issues that they're seeking attention for. But once you start being destructive or violent, and then that's where you have the problems and the issue. And also that's where you give those members who will seek to silence your voice, you give them credibility to say, look, they're violent, they're destructive, and you lose your whole message after that point. So it's a really important factor to stay disciplined, to stay focused, and to really organize, right? That's how you're really going to get the change that you're seeking.
For the final question of the evening, for both of you, Dr. Molesky, if you want to start first, what advice would you give students who want to get involved in local politics and also who want to make a change in their communities?
I think the easiest, but also the hardest thing to do is to educate yourself, right? I mean, every one of us has a wealth of information literally in our hand from the time we wake, to the time we go to bed. So it's, staying connected, educating yourself about, who's in charge, what's being said, the issues that are coming to play, and then acting upon it, right? I mean, if you want to get involved in politics, get involved with your local political organizations, right? On ODU's campus, we have active chapters of college Republicans, college Democrats. We have a libertarian chapter, right? I mean, so there's groups out there. In pretty much every one of the 7 cities, there are active young Republicans, young Democrats, right? Young organizations out there. They're great networking organizations for you all. Don't just throw away that newsletter that comes to your parents' mailbox or your mailbox from your local council member or your state rep, right? Pay attention to when Governor Northam makes a speech or announcement, right? Pay attention to when our legislative body is in session, right? For the 45 or 60 days every other year that, effectively they're in session, right? These are the things that you have to tune into and do if you really want to get engaged. Beyond that, right? If you really you want to get your kind of finger on the pulse and make change in local politics, go work at a lot of your local governmental agencies, bureaus, offices, right? So many people that are getting ready to graduate from ODU have their eyes set on heading to DC and working for a think tank or working on the Hill, right? And then you're going to compete with literally everybody and their mother for those jobs. But our local offices are starving for smart, talented young people. Take your degree from ODU, go work at the local treasurer's office, the local planetary's office, right? Go work at, the Department of Parks and Recreation. Go work at these offices, right? They're looking for really smart, young, engaged people. And once you get your foot into those offices, right? You make connections, you get interested, right? You start to actually make policy change. You start to talk with our people. You start to get in the know. And who knows, maybe you see a seat open up on a city council. You see a seat open up on a local school board. And that's when you take the next step, right? Or even if you yourself don't, somebody else who does, right? Somebody that looks like you, somebody that has walked a mile in your shoes, and you help to give them that nudge. Because that's the hardest thing. If you ever want to get into politics, we call this kind of self-selecting behavior, or there's kind of a bias in participation. The hardest thing to do is to literally throw your hat into the ring. And sometimes you need that nudge of somebody to say, hey, I think you would do a really good job. Or, hey, I think, you should run for office. Or, hey, X, Y, and Z. So at the end of the day, if you want to get involved, the first step is literally take that thing that's in your hand from the time you wake up and start educating yourself on what's going on.
Say, to get involved locally or in any state or a level of government, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. Don't let the numbers of raising money scare you. Don't let members who've been in politics forever scare you or kind of, make you timid about, getting involved. And be proud of who you are. Like, be proud of your story, your trials and tribulations, if you have any, and be proud of your beliefs. Be steadfast in your beliefs. Stand up for your values and your principles. And also, again, don't feel like you have to join a political party to make a difference. I understand. Listen, I am, nonpartisan, and to be able to. You have two parties who are basically going at each other all the time. The message can get lost that the people should be the focus of that. And so, again, don't feel like you have to settle for party politics to say, well, I have to choose a side if I want to get involved. No, just talk about and speak on the issues that have your interest, that you are concerned with. And you never know what other, your constituency who say, hey, I believe in the same things. I want to support this person. Or I don't believe quite in the same things, but I like some of the things that he or she may have said. I wonder if we can build a collaboration or we can work out our differences, compromising. And that's something I think you all athletes do well. I think athletes do well in general is like, especially coming from a football background myself, it's like, I want to keep taking on that guard, or that pulling guard, that pulling tackle, a linebacker, you take them on this time and let me get the sack, right? Or you hit the receiver, I'll get the interception. again, it's about compromise. And so I would say to get involved, just get involved. Don't take no for an answer. Be smart about it, because again, it is a lot of work, but like anything, you all are no stranger to work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of attention to detail. And again, it is not just about winning or losing a game. These are people's lives. These are your lives. These are everyday lives of your constituents. And so it's a high stakes game, but if you put in the work and you're dedicated to the people, you'll do just fine. But please don't think that if you come from a storied background that somehow you can't be a politician or get into politics. That's not true. We need you more now than ever. And trust me when I say it, we need if you think your story is so different, like we need that. Like we need you. I can't stress that enough, how vitally important you are to our future, not just locally, but to the future of this country. And so when I look at you all and you like, I play different sports, it's like, that's great, but keep an open mindset, because you never know when an opportunity may arise for you to be in a position to speak for people who don't have a voice. Sorry, I got long.
Dr. Molesky, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to add?
I think the only thing I would add to that is don't be afraid to fail. I mean, this is politics. I mean, people spend millions upon millions of dollars to influence it, right? So you will fail. I mean, that's the reality of social movements, of getting involved, right? Trying to run elections, right? I mean, you will fail, but you're advancing policy, you're advancing awareness, right? You're trying to make a difference, right? And it's kind of like playing the lottery, right? I mean, when you see something get done, right, it's like winning the lottery, right? You have overcome the odds and you've actually made tangible policy change. And, it might be winning that $4 on that Powerball ticket. That's still a win sometimes for you, right? Or you might strike it big, but that, just because you're going to, you more than likely will lose, but that shouldn't stop you from trying.
Mm-hmm. And the last bit of advice I would give y'all, I'm probably sounding like some of y'all parents here, but be careful. Please be careful of what you put on the internet. Please take social media and everybody should just do just get off it for like a month, right? One whole month. And so you can see the real world. But please be careful what you post on that, because that's on the internet forever. And if you're seeking public office, you don't want like 5 years and 10 years or however long from now someone to come back and say, back in 2021, you are this type of person. It's because everybody changes, everybody learns, but the internet is unforgiving. So please just be responsible for that. And again, I want to thank everybody for having me on here. Thank you for having me with Dr. Molesky up here, making sure keeping me straight. I felt very comfortable having a scholar on here as well. And thank you, to the ODU Student Athletic Association. Thank you all for having me. And I'm open for any questions. I'll put my email, my contact information in the chat, and I'm open to give any advice and hopefully be networking, be a helping hand to whomever.
And thank you all for having me tonight. And as I tell everybody, my class is available pretty much every semester. From state politics to public policy to talking about sex, drugs, and alcohol and prostitution. I've got a whole slew of classes, and I'd love to have you in the classroom.
All right, I want to thank both Councilman Rouse and Dr. Molesky for a very informative hour of fantastic knowledge. We really appreciate both of you for taking out the time to be here with us this evening. Thank you to Old Dominion University for allowing us to hold such an event. Thank you to ODU Athletic Department for allowing me to moderate this evening. And most importantly, thank you to all those watching this evening.